meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee will please come to order. Roll call, Board Secretary, Mr. Rogers, please.
If you are attending virtually, please state you are present and can hear the proceedings when I call your name. Dr. Haig?
I am present.
Mr. Desnoyers?
I am present.
Mr. Warsavage?
I am present and can hear the proceedings.
Mr. Neal?
I am present and can hear the proceedings.
Mrs. Dawes?
Present.
Mr. Fields?
I am present and I can hear the proceedings.
Mrs. Curry?
I am present and I can hear the proceedings.
Mrs. Mitchell?
I am present.
Mr. Brown?
I am present. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. The following motion shall be applicable for tonight's committee meetings. Policy 003 allows the board to suspend policies or parts of policies when appropriate. Therefore, due to the current ongoing crisis, I make the following motions to suspend language in two of the board's policies until the next regularly scheduled meeting. Policy 006.1, which regulates attendance at meetings via electronic communications, I move to suspend the language requiring board members to be present. Specifically, the language would be, a majority of board members shall be physically present at a board meeting when a board member attends through electronic communications. And Policy 006, which governs other requirements of board meetings, I move the suspension of language requiring that those members of the public wishing to participate be present. Specifically, the language in the section titled Public Participation would remove the words that reads, present at a board meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, please signify by saying I oppose and state your name for the record. Anyone abstaining, please say I abstain and state your name for the record. The motion carries. And we'll start with the Finance and Operations Committee virtual meeting. I will turn over the Finance and Operations Committee meeting to my co-chair, Dr. Meredith Haig.
Thank you, Board President Brown. Mr. Rogers, will you please begin with an overview of your agenda items for this evening?
Yeah, so tonight we have 4 agenda items. 3 are board action and 1 is informational. The first agenda item is the 2019-2020 annual audit report, which will be a presentation and summary by William McGowan, partner at Baker Tilly auditing firm. The second item is the 2021-2022 budget. We're going to discuss the preliminary budget versus accelerated opt-out, which we'll be asking the board to make a decision come December at the December 1st meeting to choose to either pursue a resolution authorizing the proposed preliminary budget, display and advertising, or the accelerated opt-out resolution. The third item is a capital improvements presentation. We'll review some of the capital improvements that have been done recently and our request to move forward for the 2021 projects as we move forward. And the final agenda item, which is the only informational item, is a real estate tax collection review. There was a request by board member Neil Desnoyers at the last meeting to review the cash collections compared historically to where we are now to see if there's been an actual impact or we've realized any impact in cash collections due to the pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Please do proceed with item 1, the annual audit report.
Sure. So right now I'll hand it over to William McGowan. Again, he's a partner from Baker Tilly, who is the auditing firm that provides our annual financial statements and audit, and he will give a brief overview of the report. So go ahead, Bill.
Thank you, Craig. We have substantially completed the audit of the district for the year ended 6/30/2020. The only open item is the board's final approval. A draft of the district's audit package was distributed to the board members. We expect that we will issue our opinions next Tuesday, December 1st, following the board meeting and approval thereat. A summary of the results of the audit are we expect to issue an unmodified or clean opinion on the district's financial statements. That is the highest form of assurance that our firm can provide, and that is consistent with prior years. There is a second opinion that we will issue with respect to the expenditure of federal awards. Those expenditures, the programs we looked at were Title I and IDEA, and we will provide an opinion. Again, that will be an unmodified or clean opinion, no findings relative to the expenditure of funds in those two areas. Again, we will issue that next Tuesday, subsequent to the approval by the board. The financial statements include an MD&A, or management's discussion and analysis, at the beginning, which I would encourage you to read. It highlights all the changes in the district's financial statements for the past year, and gives some insights into things that management is looking at going forward. Some of the things that I hear are on the agenda for the remainder of the evening. Management puts together the MD&A as well as the financial statements. Our piece of it really is the opinions that I talked about. The audit was conducted primarily remotely due to the pandemic, but it went very, very well. Again, as we said, we had no findings, we had no issues. Craig and his staff did a wonderful job loading information to us electronically through a secure file transfer site. We did spend a day or two there going through some paper information that we needed to do, but otherwise it was completed remotely. It went very well. The district appears to be in a pretty good position financially going into 2021. And really, I wasn't going to get into it. It's a 72-page document. I'll offer it up for any questions one might have with respect to that document and what we do. Anyone on the committee have any questions of me?
Yes, I just wanted to review something. I think I heard you state that it was favorable and it was comparable to years past, and you said the rating you gave was the highest possible rating that you can provide. Is that accurate?
Yes, it's an unmodified, or also known as a clean opinion. It is the highest form of assurance that we can provide.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. McGowan. This is Meredith Hegg. I just wanted to clarify, you said IDEA, just for our viewers, that's the Individuals with Disabilities Education. I'm going to get the acronym right, but it's IDEA. And then you said Title I, and those are the primary sources of federal funds, right? Those are sort of federal funds comprise a relatively small part of our budget, just so that the public can understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's about 14 million and change in total. The other probably the biggest program that you have is the child nutrition. That's the school lunch and breakfast programs. That's probably the biggest program. But we must alternate between these three programs every 3 years. We have to audit each one of them at least once every 3 years. So it was Title I and IDEA Special Education's turn this year. So I think the child nutrition is probably $6 or $7 million in subsidies that are received to support that program. Very important program.
Thank you, Mr. McGowan. Are there other questions from other board members, or Mr. Rogers, did you want to add something?
I just had one more quick question. You stated that in light of COVID, I guess my question is, in light of COVID, have you seen an adverse effect on the audits that you're doing for other districts? I know you commended Craig and his team, and we'll certainly do that as well, but have you seen an adverse effect of COVID on these audits with other districts?
Well, I hear you. You have an agenda item with respect to real estate tax collection. I think that's one that some districts are looking at the same as you right now. I mean, generally real estate taxes had been collected prior to the pandemic commencing. So that really wasn't an issue in 2020, but it will be an issue going forward as to whether people can continue to pay at that currently. Obviously it's delinquent taxes, but eventually, you would get your money. It's just the district would receive the taxes. It's just a matter of how long that will take. That seems to be one on the revenue side, and the extra supplies, et cetera, that those costs and how they're going to be reimbursed through CARES Act funding or other matters. Those are what people are most concerned about for the short term. So my guess is, from what I'm talking with Craig and what I'm seeing here, you're struggling with the same issues that everyone else is struggling with.
Thank you very much.
If no other board members have questions for Bill, I'd like to let him jump off. I'll be able to, if there are any public comments come in, I feel confident that I can answer them instead of him having to spend any additional time waiting out the agenda items, if that's okay with the board members.
Yep.
Sounds good to me, Mr. Rogers.
So, Bill, thank you for your time, and if you'd like to log off, you're good to go.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
So we'll jump right into the next agenda item, which is the 2021-2022 budget. And we're going to discuss, as I said before, we're going to discuss our options as of right now, whether we pursue a preliminary budget or an accelerated opt-out. So we'll jump right into the presentation here. So first up, we're just going to discuss, as we usually do at this time of the year, what do we actually know? And this is an extension of last month's presentation. And we can talk about the 21-22 applicable Act 1 information, and then we're going to discuss the historical Upper Darby School District Act 1 information. And then we'll jump right into the impact of the decision on the timeline for our budget. So whether it's a preliminary budget or an accelerated opt-out resolution, how that impacts the district and the future meetings that we'll have and presentations. So first up, when we discuss the actual index, so in a normal school year, you would be looking at that current year's Act 1 index and the adjusted index. Due to the fact that Delaware County is going through a countywide reassessment, we're required to use the previous year's Act 1 and adjusted index. So I've shown both. Leading in the next year's budget, the 2021-2022, the base index is actually 3%, and Upper Darby's adjusted index is 4.4. I have an X over it to show we are not going to be using that in our budget process. We'll be using the same numbers we used last year due to the reassessment. So where we're at is the base index will be 2.6 and the adjusted index 3.8, meaning you cannot exceed 3.8 if you go down the path of a opt-out resolution versus a preliminary budget. You could potentially pursue referendum exemptions. So if we look back historically, and this is just building out on the prior years. So if we look back for the past 5 years, you can see the actual in yellow is the actual tax increase that was approved by the board for that budget year. The second one down is the base index and then the adjusted index. So as you work from left to right, you can see starting in 16-17, the district had a 0% tax increase, which was obviously less than the base index. In 17-18, it went to 2.89, which was slightly above base, but still below the adjusted. 18-19, 2.5, again, slightly above the base index, but well below the adjusted. In 19-20, it was 1.9, below both indexes. And then in 2021, we went to the base index of 2.6, and I'm showing here again the same base index and adjusted index as previously explained, and to be determined. And then the graph just shows kind of visually where were we in comparison to those the base index and the adjusted index, and working left to right, the purple would be the actual school district's increase in taxes, gray being the base, and gold being the adjusted index. So really just jumping straight into the process here and really what this presentation is about. You know, at this point, we know what the index is, and historically, we have not pursued in recent years the preliminary budget process, which would allow you to go above your adjusted index. I think that in my personal and professional opinion, and based on the historic data that I've shown here, you know, having an adjusted index of 3.8% while we are still amidst a pandemic, I'm not sure the board wants to entertain the idea of going above a 3.8% tax increase. But here's what it would look like. If you chose to go the preliminary budget route, you can see the dates that would kind of go in. So the next step is beyond this. On December 1st, we would have the board approve one resolution or the other. Going the preliminary route, which would require us to the board would give us the authority to display and advertise that we are going to do a preliminary budget. The alternate would be the opt-out resolution, which what that says is the board will not exceed the adjusted index of 3.8%. That's the decision on December 1st, really, which we'll talk about tonight, or which path we'll go on. Beyond that, you really just have different mile markers. So when you go into the preliminary budget phase, you have to hit a couple extra mile markers because you have to get that preliminary budget actually approved, whereas in the opt-out resolution, you go straight to the proposed budget. That's not to say that we wouldn't have the public forum and the public conversations at our committee meetings. In the past couple of years, we've tried to bring any information we have forward at every committee meeting leading up to the final approval of the budget. And I don't see that happening any differently. I believe that we should continue to update the board and the public as more information comes to us. And quite frankly, if it doesn't, maybe we still revisit where are we, even if it's just district update versus, in recent years, we typically down to the wire on getting information from a state perspective of funding. I don't foresee that being much different this year. I think everybody's kind of under the gun and there's, a lot going into these decisions. But you can see just quickly how it lays out on either side the requirements, and you'll see what the board would be required to approve. And like I said, we always back into a committee meeting before that approval and we give an official presentation. So on either side, you can see that, May 11th, if you look at the opt-out resolution side, that second and third bullet mirror the fourth and fifth of the preliminary. So you really just add in those two additional bullet points or steps, which on the preliminary budget would be that no later than December 22nd, we would have a public display of the preliminary budget. And then the next one would be on January 12th, the board would vote and adopt a preliminary budget, and we would do the public presentation in December. So they kind of back right into those requirements. But that's where we stand as far as same procedure as we've had in the past few, well, for many years, but from a presentation perspective, this is the same format that we've followed for a couple years now. And really what it comes down to is the appetite of a tax increase versus an opt-out resolution capping you at 3.8, whereas the preliminary budget process would allow you to pursue referendum exemptions. So are there any questions from the board?
Excuse me, I have one question for you, Mr. Rogers. You said that we are not using the 2020, 2021 numbers, we're using the 1920 numbers because of the reassessment. I was just curious, is that because we have to, that's a legal thing, or is that out of prudence?
So all of this is dictated. So no matter what the tax year is, you don't get to choose your Act 1. In this case, you're told. Because in a reassessment year, you're required to use the prior year Act 1. I believe the concept behind it is you have to, when you come out of a reassessment, you have to be revenue neutral. But that doesn't mean that this current year's budgeted revenue has to match next year's. What it means is what you start with before you have your tax increase has to be revenue neutral to this year. So you take into consideration all of the reassessments, you take that full reassessment of value across the school district, so that would be the two boroughs in the township, and you recalculate your revenue, your tax revenue, and come up with what would be a new millage rate. Your millage rate's what's going to change with the assessment. But when you multiply that out, the revenue has to go neutral to our current year being 1920 revenue, right? So then you have your base year, the revenue stays the same. Each individual homeowner, commercial property owner has a new assessment, new millage rate, but in theory, if that was in effect this year, your tax bill would be no different. Then you go into the actual tax increase, which then takes your new millage rate, and so long as it's above a 0% tax increase, that millage rate would potentially go up based on the increase. So when you're looking at going back to be revenue neutral, I believe they look at it as stay in that same year and you're going to use that same Act 1 index while you're building it back out.
I'm going to lose track of some of the numbers, but you had talked previously, when we passed our last budget, we had a higher percentage, but because of the reassessment, it was as if it was equivalent to a lower percentage under the previous assessment, correct?
So I think
Am I confusing things?
just a little, but
Go for it.
I'll clarify. I think what you're trying to say is when we looked from the prior year, which will probably be like the next month's presentation that we always get into, and looking at, although the percentage increase was similar or was higher than the prior year's increase, the dollar amount offset was almost the same.
Right.
So it took 2.6 to be able to equate to the additional revenue versus a 1.9 in the prior year. The revenue amount stayed the same. The difference in that year was not a reassessment. What happened was we had a reduction in assessment, right? So the total value of properties in 1920 went down compared to the 2020-2021 budget year. So from year to year, homes, commercial properties, the assessment can change. Somebody can, dispute their assessment and go through the process. From one year to in the last budget cycle, our assessment went down. So when you take that total millage amount and multiply it out, there's a potential to lose revenue if your assessments are decreasing.
Right.
In this case, it'll stay neutral, although the assessments are quote unquote going up, right? They're trying to re-level the playing field essentially from a real estate perspective. Because for years, we've been at a common level ratio of like 50%. So you're just round numbers, and this is not universal to every property, but just generally speaking, when you would calculate it out, the real value of your home was actually almost double what the assessment was. But for tax purposes in Delaware County, the assessment had not been changed in many, many years. So we won't see the loss of assessment per se, because we're going to recalculate and be level funded revenue-wise from the current year's budget to next year's. And then you'll discuss as a board and through the budget process the potential of a tax increase from there. So there's two different topics, and a reassessment's a little odd because it doesn't happen often. Did that answer your question?
I think so. I'm trying to make sure that we're not going to be in a stickier situation than we otherwise would be because of the reassessment. That's, I guess, the short answer that I want.
So I think what's important right now in Upper Darby is one of the school districts, I think, that's not in as precarious a situation as other school districts. There's much debate on a county level, and I think as a school district, we want to be involved in paying attention to what's going on and how, local real estate taxes and then, properties, as far as businesses and non-residential properties are concerned. The reassessment seems to be one where there's disagreement in the county on how that has played out. So right now, I think there's a lot of conversation and discussion on where that's going to go and how that's going to fall out, to your point. I know that some of the school districts feel that the reassessment process is going to hurt the school districts significantly based on the outcome of the reassessment process. Our understanding at this time in reviewing this with our legal team is that Upper Darby School District is right now, from what we can tell, not a school district that has had a significant or substantial impact as a result of the reassessment. Other school communities, however, have. And it could be, to your point, Dr. Haig, have a more significant impact on their budget. You're correct in expressing that concern because there could be. I think one of the examples here is commercial properties in Upper Darby are not, running the same way as commercial properties or the reliance on those commercial properties in other communities. And as a result, I guess our school district is not in the same discussion as that controversy right now. And that's what we're looking at. Craig and I have conversations regularly about it. In supporting my fellow superintendents, in the county, I know that it could impact the funding of their public schools, obviously, because they rely heavily on local real estate taxes to do that. So I know there's been a lot of discussion taken to the county at county meetings representation from the IU, representation from local school districts, going and asking questions and really asking for a sit-down. What seems to be at the center of the debate, from what I understand, is the chance to have a look at the numbers when they come in and what the impact would be before they accept it and move forward with that. And I think that's potentially where we need to pay attention, where this falls out, because it looks like school districts like Upper Darby are not in a situation where that reassessment process has hurt us as substantially as others. And I think that's caused others to say, hey, what's going on here? And we have to stay tuned as far as where this is going. We don't want to see any school district or any school community negatively impacted by the reassessment. So Craig and I are definitely following this, and we're keeping a close eye on it, as are our attorneys that are involved. And we keep Kyle informed, and we have conversations about where we are. I think it's something that we have to play out. I do think as we have this conversation, and Kyle and Craig, we continue to go through it, as a superintendent, I think we would all, probably agree that adjusted index of 3.8% in the midst of a pandemic is high. So what we need to look at, regardless, as a school district, is, how do we continue to navigate the uncertainty that is the virus, as well as the reassessment at the same time happening, and then look at ways that we can provide the best programs for our kids, and balance the uncertainty that is this budgeting process. A lot of areas, it seems that their townships are going with a low tax increase, and we have to pay attention to what that looks like as well as a school district and the impact on our community, because I think they are concerned about how the reassessment process, when it plays out, will be there. One of the further points to the reassessment is that there needs to be, or there's discussion, obviously I'm not a politician or a county council person, but there seems to be discussion that this is something that hasn't happened for 20-something odd years, and nobody really wants to be responsible for this process, I think. And there needs to be a every 5-year, from what I'm hearing, a more frequent process of this reassessment, so it's not this shock and all of 20 years later and we're doing it. So I know it's a very a hot topic, I'll leave it at that, a hot topic at the county level, and we should all keep our eyes and ears open as far as how it plays out and how our school community is impacted.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. And as you say, you mentioned the uncertainty, and then also this sort of feeling of local communities being a little bit pitted against each other. And it just reminds me to reiterate what Mr. Rogers said, that we have to make all of these decisions without really knowing what the state is going to do, and that the state has typically passed a budget after we've passed our budget. So I just want to make sure all of our listeners, all the people watching, understand that we're being forced to make decisions without really having all of the information, which is frustrating, I think. I think Mr. Neal had a question, and then maybe President Brown. Mr. Neal, did you have a question?
Yes, Dr. Haig, thank you. It's actually a great segue to what you were speaking to. Mr. Rogers, thank you for your presentation. My question is, could you explain the dates for the state budget and whether or not the state budget matches the school district's budget timeline for their fiscal years, just so that residents are aware?
So the state budget does mirror our fiscal year, but they seem to follow a different timeline than we do. And in the past, and Dan's over here shaking his head, I think over the past 3 years, we haven't gotten the actual revenue numbers for the budget or our allocation as a district until after we've approved the budget. 2 years ago, I believe it came out in the summer, July or August. I think prior to that, it came out right in time. Last year, we got one allocation and it changed right before we passed the budget. I don't know if you recall from last year, we were really projecting. We went from anywhere, the original numbers came out, the preliminary basic ed allocation from the state, and we had an increase that was coming to the district. The pandemic hit. They backed off, and there was rumors of the best we were going to get was level funding from the 1920 budget, and that there was a potential that it could go no lower than the 3-year average of the prior 3 years, which would have technically been a decrease from 1920 because you would have went back 19-20, 18-19, and 17-18. And obviously, those two prior years, beyond what would have been considered level funding, were lower. So it's a struggle every year, and we hope that this year's not the same, but I do think that when you look at the reality of the situation, the state just passed the second half of their budget last week. They were able to put through a half-a-year budget. Luckily, they did put education at the forefront of the budget and make sure that first part included the funding for schools. They had a slight hiccup with the Social Security reimbursement, or the homestead, which is the tax relief. We didn't get all of our revenue thus far. The second half that just came out is going to release the rest of the funds. They worked out their revenue sources to make that happen. But simply put, I don't know their specific deadlines as far as how it relates to the Act 1 exact dates, but based on past practice and what we've seen, they do not hit the exact same deadlines as us. And I'll also say, because I didn't reiterate this before, these are our projected dates so it fits in line with our committee meetings and board meetings, so that we can actually get it approved without having to have special voting meetings and bring the board and the community out to multiple nights outside of the normal procedures. But in all reality, the actual requirement for us to pass a budget is June 30th. That is the absolute latest you can pass it. And then what happens is you have to back into certain mile markers for the final budget, where you have 30 days prior, you have to advertise, 20 days prior, you have to give the intent, you have to make it available for public consumption, so they display it, and 10 days prior, give the intent of adopting the actual budget. So that's where you'll see some of these dates we fit in so that they meet the state guidelines. And the idea is that it has to be passed no later than June 30th so that the taxes can get out. As a school district, you're supposed to issue your taxes on July 1st. If there was, in theory, a delay in the budget and a delay in the taxes being issued, you would then likely delay your tax payment windows versus a normal year.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Thank you, Dr. Haig.
And I'm glad you have that slide on the screen. Just a suggestion, because you did, thanks for the way you explained it, but those last two bullet items under opt-out, they really correlate to whether we do the preliminary budget or not. So I would just move them down so that it will be easy for the public to see, no matter which option we choose, those apply. So I would just line them up, and if you have that parking space in the middle, you can put no action, so that there's no bullets for the other one. So
Sure.
Just a suggestion.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I just have two really brief, quick comments. I do appreciate the leadership that was required of a state legislature to make sure that public education have been a priority in their budget figurings out. That being said, I do want to not completely let them off the hook, because we're still underfunded by over $16 million at a clip. And I don't mean to get on that horse right now, but it's really important, because there are real consequences to potentially exploring what it means for this district to have a 0% tax increase. We do have to also keep in mind the fact that while a 0% tax increase may seem like the most prudent thing to do given the current circumstances, and I would be one of those people that may feel that way, we're still going to be playing catch up on top of playing catch up, because we will then look at the following year's budget and then consider what revenue streams we do or don't have, but we're still going to have the same expenditures. They're not going to go down, they're going to go up. And until the state deals with its inequity in terms of public education funding, it's not going to get too much better in a vast way, and we need that structural change. So everyone listening, please contact your state legislatures that you're friendly with, and maybe some that you might not be friendly with. Tell them how important public education funding is. The other thing that I did want to mention is, actually, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Moore-Savage. I believe Ms. Mitchell has a question.
Actually, it's just a brief comment. I know the state will be facing quite a bit of a structural deficit going into this next budget cycle, and there may not be an appetite on the state level to raise taxes. And typically, what I've seen in my years of experience is they sort of kick this can down the road to the school districts to make these difficult decisions. So while we obviously no one wants to raise taxes, we're all homeowners, and we don't want our own taxes raised, we do have to take into consideration what the needs of the district are. And just as we walk through this process, if we could just, I know in years past, we've gone over the budget in some of these other meetings that might have been scheduled if we did a preliminary budget. If we could possibly keep at least it on the agenda every so often so that we know where we're going, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
And Dr. McGarry wanted to say something?
Sure. With all the great work, and I wanted to wait until everybody questioned, I just want to say that, I worry about these public presentations because every time a guy like Craig Rogers presents, it's on video, and, it's a matter of time for somebody rings him up on a phone call and tries to steal him away. So I want to say to Craig, I appreciate all your hard work, and during the last 2 years, you were asked a question of budgets being passed. I've been doing this now probably, for a long time. I won't say how long I've been in central office. And I can't tell you when there's ever been a time when it's been easy to pass a budget. But I think the way that you present the information, the calm that you have in balancing a budget, trying to figure it out and solve problems is unbelievable, especially given the circumstances that we are. We're also trying to manage a pandemic. Every other day the state changes the rules and the process and the procedures. And you're one of the business managers that I know that cares about education, not just the dollars. So, it's oftentimes when you're in a school district, a business manager focuses on that. You cross the line and care about the technology, about the education, about the curriculum, about making sure that people are getting what they need to do their jobs. And I think that speaks volumes about who you are and how you serve this community. As everybody has discussed and presented tonight, I think we need to keep our eye on the fact that we're going to have to walk people through. And, I don't know what the number is tonight on this, but I definitely think we need to get more people out to these meetings to start to follow what could happen going through the school year. And I just want to, prepare everybody that we as superintendents and school districts navigating this pandemic have to balance budgets with their school boards and with their business offices. And I think as we navigate this pandemic, we are going to be providing you, regardless of the decision you make, whether you go with the accelerated opt-out or you look for the exemptions. I think it's important that we do show the public what we can live without and how we manage this, and what you may have to decide to keep or not to keep if the pandemic rages on and we don't get our act together as adults in this society and start to follow these rules. We're putting a lot of burden on people, and ultimately at the end of the day, school districts have a budget to balance, and it's right now in Pennsylvania on the backs of local taxpayers. We will have to provide this board and this public with a review of what it looks like, from a 0% tax increase to what Craig and I worked through last year. This is what it will look like as we work through this. We are working as an administration on that process. This is not to create shock and awe. Our focus is going to preserve the programming and everything that we can in the school district. But we also have to be, real about what this is doing to people and how we have to, in ways, look at how we can capitalize on this pandemic and how technologies and opportunities to learn and save money, how we've learned to do that. It's not just been a situation when we put our head down and just get through it. We're working as an administration on, okay, what are we learning from this and how can we save money in the long term as a result of this pandemic? So as an administration, we just want the board to know and the public to know that we'll be coming forward starting December, looking at schedules, looking at how students are accessing curriculum and resources, courses, how courses are leveled. We're going to talk about how we navigate this pandemic coming out of it so that, we do provide our community and our kids the best, but not at the expense of we're overwhelming our taxpayers financially. So I just hope everybody is tuning in and will continue to tune in, and it won't be this shock and awe that if the school board is under pressure, understandably so, to have a minimal tax increase because of this virus and this pandemic, then the administration is going to have to figure out a way to navigate that. And our plan will be to provide you as many options as we can. As Ms. Mitchell said, our kids in this school district, the problem that I have as a superintendent being here, we need a couple breaks. And it just feels like every time we turn around, we get going in a really good direction. And there's so many positive things, as you heard tonight, this wonderful review of our financials. And it's hard to move forward on all the goals and initiatives you have to move things in such a positive direction when you constantly have to, as Dr. Haig, you're questioning, like, we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful. You know, and at some point in time, it gets old. You know? So public education has to become a priority, and I think we've proven how important it is to society that public education and public schools are so, so important. And hopefully the funding will come once this pandemic clears. But right now, I just want you to know that we will be providing many options on whatever, because I know it's going to happen anyway, because you're smart and you're going to ask the questions as school board members. What does it look like if we do this? What does it look like if we do that? And I want you to know we are already working on those what ifs.
Thanks, Dr. McGarry. And that reminds me to sort of make clear to anyone listening who doesn't already understand this. I think probably a lot of people do who are following along all the time, but in case we have anyone new, that this idea that we've got this excellent rating from our auditors doesn't mean we're flush with cash, right? I think that it's very easy for people to look at something like that and think it means we have money. It doesn't mean we have money. It means we are doing an excellent job of managing the very limited funds that we have. So I just want to make sure that it was said loud and clear, that this doesn't mean we have money to burn or anything close to it. We just are doing a great job. And thank you, Mr. Rogers, for doing such a great job with what we have. Mr. Warsavage?
Hi, guys. Sorry to keep everyone in this part of the meeting, but I did want to touch on something I guess we're going to be talking about later on today. Capital improvements and things like that. This kind of a rating for the community, so that the community is aware, does allow us to have very favorable conditions when we go out for bond issuances, including the one that we had just got that allowed us to do a whole lot of really wonderful, amazing things to quite a few of our schools here in the district. Brand new windows, remodeled bathrooms, I mean, the whole gamut. But one other small piece that we need to keep in mind is that there are some lawsuits that are preventing us from being able to progress further. And outside of whatever ethical or legal wranglings are involved, they cost money. And I'm someone who supports anyone's right to be able to engage the judicial system in a responsible, careful manner. But we do need to keep in mind that there is a serious monetary investment every time we do have to engage certain stakeholders on issues that otherwise could potentially be resolved if we didn't have to get the courts involved or have to spend so much money on lawyers who are going to be tangled up in the courts. So I just want to put that out there to remind the public how important it is that we do, to Dr. McGarry's point, do our best as fellow adults and community members to handle our business, because a whole lot of people are depending on us to get this right. And there is no alternative to getting it right. We have to get it done. Thank you.
Excellent points. Thank you, Mr. Warsavage. Anything else? If not, I think we can move on, Mr. Rogers.
So before I move to the next agenda, first I'd like to thank Dr. McGarry for the kind words. And I also want to piggyback Damien's comments and Dr. Haig's. When you get nervous when you hear the audit. It's great that we have a very healthy financial statement, right? He's referring to, they review our internal controls, they review how we spent the money, did we follow policy, and quite frankly, what they issue is whether the statements are within material misstatement, right? They have to make sure that they're accurate. What are we presenting? So that's health from an auditor's perspective. I was an auditor. That's all that's what you look at. You want to make sure that the financials are healthy, and that's great. But at the end of the day, we've had budgets for all the years that I've been here where if the public actually saw the requests, and Dr. Council would speak to this, of the actual staff we need to provide services and supports to our students is astronomical, in my opinion. We've had budgets where we can't afford to add those services. So yeah, last year we did a great job. We came in at base index. We didn't add one staff member. If the pandemic didn't hit, the budget conversation we had planned was much different in order to give more supports and focus them on our elementary students and make sure they have the proper supports to make sure that the reading levels are up to par when they get to third grade. So yes, we've done a good job, and we've been able to balance our budgets as best we can, and we're fiscally responsible, but at the end of the day, we are underfunded. And if we had that funding, it would go straight to the staffs, the support to our students. So that's a tough pill to swallow when you're going through that process. And as Damien spoke about the idea of going to a 0%, I just keep thinking of the image of like being on the beach with my son and I'm digging a hole in the sand. And the expenses are getting more and more and more. But the hole's getting deeper not only because I'm digging deeper, but as I throw the sand up and out, I'm building up the wall, right? So like if somebody's not there to spread that out and keep a level playing field while you're digging down and building up, it doubles down on you. So I just get that image in my mind. So I appreciate the board members adding that, and I appreciate that they understand, that to the extent they do. So with that said, I'll jump into the next presentation. Next up, we have the capital improvements, which Craig Harnachek out of our facilities department is going to give an overview of the assessment of where we are, some of the priorities we have as a district, and where we've been, some of the projects that we've completed, challenges, successes that we've had, and how we plan to move forward. And we're actually going to make a recommendation for the 2021 projects that we'd like to pursue. So, Craig, if you're there, you can kick it off.
Good evening. First of all, we had a relatively successful 2020 capital program. We still have some projects due to COVID concerns that are lagging behind, primarily the window projects. That's due to the fact that the manufacturers had to limit their staffing at their facilities, and that in turn reduced output. So the Garriford project is now moving forward, the window replacement at that location. However, we are a few months behind schedule on that. And then Beverly Hills will probably start sometime after the first of the year, since the windows haven't even been acquired at this point, or they're not in fabrication, should I say, at this point in time. Both toilet room modernization projects had their problems, primarily due to the general contractor. We've addressed 90% of the problems at Drexel Hill. Stonehurst is pretty much wrapped up at this time in punch list, and we should be wrapping up the Drexel Hill project, would say in early December, along with the punch list items there. The asphalt paving projects were completed on time and on schedule. There was really no COVID impact to them due to the fact that they're obviously outside. Moving forward, the problems that we want to look at are scheduling, estimating, and contractor performance. Again, I would like to consider possibly next year moving the capital program start back to September, if that's at all possible. That allows us to, if there's a budgetary issue, numbers come in too high on a project, a design issue, an unforeseen condition, we have the time to recalibrate and then still go out for summer construction. Estimating, as you're aware, both toilet room modernization projects came in over budget. Part of that was due to some material concerns. Part of that was due to some COVID issues with contractors not knowing what conditions would be like. Some of them were due to errors in material costs. Going forward, we're going to be moving with third-party estimating consultants and not relying so much on the architects. That's sort of a stretch sometimes for some of their expertise. Paving contractors is very easy to estimate. Toilet room modernizations, there's a lot of variables there that we really need an expert who does this on a regular basis to be doing that. So that's the direction we're going on, to try to eliminate those surprises once bids come through. Contractor performance, as I said earlier, our GC's performance was not where we wanted it to be, but I think we can address that through a better vetting process, possibly better contract language, best qualified contractor. And we're working towards that at this point in time. Successes. We've managed to reduce the design fee percentages on these capital improvement projects and get them more in line with what's typically accepted in industry. We eliminated some design fees by moving the projects through in-house management and in-house design. And then we also supervised all the capital improvements in-house through construction management. We've increased the consultant evaluation pools. I still think there's room for improvement there. We'll probably try to grow that specifically on this year and going forward. And then diversity was a real high point this year. Participation rates jumped up dramatically. I don't know that we're going to be anywhere near that in the 2021 projects, simply because of some of the vendors we're working with. We won't be revisiting them because of their project type won't be part of the 2021 objectives. This is a breakdown of the projects that we're looking for the 2021 capital improvements. We have several paving projects, just a few fire alarm upgrades, restriping, 2 toilet room modernizations, and then the 2 window projects that I had mentioned earlier. We're going to be shifting Gariford due to the COVID concerns to a daytime operation since we're reducing staff on site. And then Beverly Hills, depending on field conditions at the time we receive our material in 2021, that could be a day or it could be an evening project. Those toilet room modernization projects we budgeted for. Bywood is going to come in very similar to Stonehurst since they are sister properties and have a similar design footprint. Beverly Hills is a much larger project, even more so than Drexel Hill. I would like to probably start that project during the school year, but dealing in areas away from the general student population in order to get the entire project done probably a month prior to the end of school and then a month into the actual school season. And that's basically the scope of our capital improvements. As you can see on this chart, the toilet room modernizations account for a very, very large slice of that capital pie, just due to the amount of work that's involved in those, the amount of trades, and the amount of time. Paving, we can cover a lot of asphalt problems with a relatively small amount. Playground equipment, that just indicates just one set of swings, I think, at one of our locations. And then the fire alarm upgrades at 2% account for 2 schools. At this point in time, I'll take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Harnachek. Are there questions from the board members? Mr. Neal?
Thank you, Dr. Haig. My question is in reference to the code compliance upgrade. Is that the fire alarm upgrades? Is that, do they correlate?
Yes. Those are code up, not system replacements.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Harnachek?
Thank you, Dr. Haig. Yeah, sorry.
Mr. Harnachek, this is could be a long question, but I don't mean for it to be too long. Could you just say a little bit about how, I know we have a very, very large number of projects that could be completed, sort of how you're prioritizing these, just so the public can understand that?
Okay. They're prioritized primarily due to need. Obviously, our dollars don't go anywhere near as far as what we really could use to improve the facilities. So every year we have a 5-year plan that actually extends out past that, but the realistic window is 5 years. And projects are prioritized year over year based on where the need falls. And then we take our budget numbers and based on the amount of dollars we have to spend, we restack that priority every single year because you could have a roof failure or a wall failure or something that needs to be addressed immediately, and then that moves obviously to the front of the pack. So that's in effect how we actually do it.
In regards to the capital improvements, and I know our administration has been pretty on the ball with this, is our branding. I want to make sure that we continue with our branding. I want to make sure that we continue. I know with our bathrooms, they look great. It's when you walk in, you know you're in Upper Darby School District, and it's great. I know some future projects coming up. Whether it's a field or tennis court or whatnot, that we continue that branding so that way we can continue building that district loyalty with our students and make sure that they feel at home and proud of where they go to school. So I just want to make sure our administration's aware of that. That's something I would be looking for in each of these projects. Color, branding, all of that. Thank you.
Craig, can you speak more to what we're going to do in the future to address the contractor problems that we had that you mentioned, so that we don't run into that again? Thanks.
What we need to do is set up a more robust vetting of contractors. What I'd like to do is consider pre-qualification of contractors. It's a little too late to start that now for these projects coming up. We need to move on that possibly a year in advance. In the city of Philadelphia and several municipalities in New Jersey, all contractors are pre-qualified before they're permitted to bid on district projects. And you can go through a series of financial rigors, projects that they currently have in-house, bonding capability, how close they are to their bonding limits. There's a series of different metrics that you could use to sort of measure their ability to perform, and then also looking at their past performance.
Thanks, Craig. I really appreciate that. I think there'll probably be a lot of support for that.
I certainly hope so.
If there are no other comments, Mr. Rogers, maybe the next item?
Next up, we have the real estate tax collection review in response to Board Member Neil Norder's request. So this is relatively quick, but I figured I'd give a little overview. Originally, I was just going to kind of show the numbers, but I figured I'd go into, instead of assuming that everybody fully understands the tax collection process, because I live this on a regular basis. So I figured I'd give a little bit of a quick overview. As I referenced in the budget presentation, the budget can be approved no later than June 30th, which impacts the date for which the taxes go out. The goal is always to get your taxes out by July 1st or the closest business day. So in most given years, you push out your bill date would be July 1st. And then what happens is there's various payment options. You can pay your bill in full or in installments. If you pay in full, you can pay at a 2% discount no later than August 31st. Face would be the flat amount, meaning whatever your bill actually came out at, no discount, no penalty. And that has to be paid by October 31st. Penalty would start at the beginning of November and go till January 31st, and that's a 10% penalty on your face amount or your flat amount. Beyond that, then you would be considered delinquent if your taxes remain unpaid after January 31st. The other option is through 3 equal installments. And in order to get into the installment program, you must make your first installment payment no later than August 31st. You then can pay your second's due by the 30th and your third by the 31st. Those, if you notice, the third has to be paid by October 31st, same as the face or flat amount. When you make those installments, it's, as I said, 3 equal payments of your flat amount. So you're foregoing the discount amount in order to pay it gradually over those months. Still due by the face due date of October 31st. So quickly, what I did here was, based on the request and where we are right now, we've really wanted to give a complete cash collection as of a certain date, right? So you cut off, it was clean based on, we got lucky with when the request came in, really, being that your flat period ends October 31st. So what I did was looked back 5 years at the collection rate, cash collection rate through October 31st of each given year. So what you can see is from 2015 to 2019, the average, the 5-year average for collection is 90.04%. 2015 was 88.64. 2016 was 89.71. 2017 spiked a little to 91.29. And 2018 was 89.89. And 2019 was 90.67%. In the current year through October 31st, we are at a collection rate of 91.02%. So what that shows is we're actually collecting higher than the 5-year average, which supports my theory that I had been projecting out during the budget process of last year, and also my response to Mr. Desnoyer's question the other month, that due to the majority of our community being homes on mortgage with an escrow account, they had been the majority collected up through before the pandemic actually hit. And it also speaks to Bill McGowan, our auditor, his comments of he's seen that same trend. Him and I actually had a conversation last week about this presentation, because they do audits of actual banks, who are issuing the mortgages. He went a step further. I guess he wasn't prepared to say it. I'll say it for him. These aren't his words. I'll take them as my own. But he may or may not have told me the banks that are his clients have not seen a decrease in mortgage payments. Most people in studies that when you hit a recession or something like that, typically the last bill you're going to stop paying is your mortgage. So hopefully the pandemic is resolved sooner than later, and the economy can kind of bounce back and bounce back from that. I do think that if we're going to see any kind of impact to these numbers, it could potentially be next year. I would think if the pandemic continues, the following year would be when we really start seeing a bigger decrease. But as I said, you have the mortgage payments coming in, and typically if your escrow is not on file anyway, the mortgage company still is going to ensure payment. You're going to end up in back taxes on your mortgage and catching up on your escrow. So it's kind of like a intertwined, complicated case. But that being said, too, to Bill McGowan's point, if it goes delinquent, it's still owed to the district. It just comes in, it really becomes a cash flow issue. So when you go delinquent, it'll be collected in future years. So whether you pay that a year, 2, 3, 4 years out, the funds still come in through the delinquent collection. It's just a deferral of the income. So you're not recognizing it in the current year, but in future years, your delinquent may go up. So in theory, if you bounce back from COVID, and let's say that delinquents do go up next year or the year after because the collection rate goes down, 3-4 years from now, our delinquent collection rate, or the amount of money we're actually bringing in from delinquent payments, will be higher than prior years, catching up on the tax payments. So if anybody has any questions, I'll take them now.
Thanks, Mr. Rogers. I believe Ms. Curry has a question first.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rogers, for giving this presentation. I think it's really helpful in understanding what it looks like. I would like to go back to the slide from the 2021 tax collection year, maybe, or the installment process. Maybe that's the one. Right. So the installments, thank you very much. For the installments, August 31st, 2nd, September 30th, and October 31st, for families that are trying to make the installments, particularly through the devastation of the pandemic, is there any way that, who determines these installments? Is it us, or is it something that's determined by the county? I was just trying to make sure. And if so, is with next year, is that, I understand that you said we wouldn't see it until prior years, but families that aren't trying to fall behind, but have had difficulties with monies, is there any way that it could look more like the first installment, August 31st, the second installment, October 31st, and then that third installment being at the end of the year, since it really doesn't go into penalty until after December 31st? Just a question. Thanks.
So just to clarify, as of November 1st, you fall directly into the penalty window. The penalty window is from November 1st through January 31st. And the tax dates have been historic here and are also dictated by statute, tax statute. I'm not a legal professional to really get too deep into that. If we want it, we could refer to Mr. Berman. I do know that in the past year, there was conversation out of the state to pass legislation to allow boards to make a decision to be flexible with certain dates. But the discount, face, and penalty periods are technically statutory. Does that answer your question?
I guess I'm just wondering if, in light of a pandemic, is there a way to lighten that load for families whose taxes aren't in their mortgages? That's, I guess, what I'm saying, because I don't know if Mr. Berman wants to address it. The extension to the end of the year, the 31st of December, I know you're saying the November 1st, but I'm just wondering, in light of the pandemic, can that be altered for next year?
I can answer that question. So the answer is that yes, you can alter your installment payments. I'm not sure if that's, I sort of caught half of what you were asking about, because there are, as Craig was talking about, there are the statutory periods where it's the discount, face, or penalty period, and those timelines are set by statute. There was an exception that was made for this year by statute, but the school districts were actually exempted from that change. And it wouldn't have applied to you anyway because the timing of it corresponds to what the municipality's fiscal year looks like, not your fiscal year. As far as the installment payments go, Craig, could you go back to that slide for the installment payments? I think, yeah, there it is. So you, by resolution at some point over the past several years ago, sometime after 2012 when this was put into place by statute, you passed a resolution that indicated here's the schedule that you are going to accept for installment payments. You can change that. There is a minimum number of installments, which is 3. You could make the installments greater than 3. You also could extend the installment period beyond when you have it now. You actually can extend it through the point at which you do the turnover to the county. So you could go into January, since you apparently continue to accept payments of your taxes through January. But that would be something that would only be in place for next year. It wouldn't be in place for this year at this point.
Because of the exemption, right, Mr. Berman?
It wouldn't be available for this year because this tax year is already in place and you can't change the installment payment schedule for this year. You can change it for next year, however.
Okay, I understand that. So thank you, Mr. Berman. Mr. Rogers, just as a follow-up to what I was saying, I'm questioning it because I just know the impact of unemployment right now, and that many families who are trying to stay in good standing may need a little extra support. And so I understand with it being in the escrow and the mortgage, but for those families, particularly our seniors, whose mortgages may be paid off, they pay installments of their taxes outside of their mortgage because they don't have any other mortgage payments to pay. So that's something that I really would like us to take a look at to see where we can stretch it just to help people in light, again, of the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will say, I believe this was discussed again back during the budget process too, and I had brought up that because there was conversation about districts letting you pay your face into the penalty period where you would pay face all the way through December 31st. There is a revenue implication to that, obviously. So that's a loss of revenue based on, and we've had pretty consistent collections in each period, whether it be discount, face, or penalty for many years. So we typically can project out how much penalty we're going to collect because that's 10% on top of the flat tax collection. So, it doesn't go without saying that there would be a revenue impact if you did that, if you allowed people to pay all the way through the penalty period at essentially your face amount. But we can explore that option if the board would like to. I just want to make it clear there is a revenue impact to that type of decision.
I just had a question regarding that. The payment schedules, Craig, if they make the first payment and they don't make the September 30th payment, what's the implication of that? And I guess if they just made a double payment on October 31st, is that a catch-up process?
So this is, I kind of start squirming when Kyle talks about the minimum of 3 payments. You can go to 4. Installment payments are very hard to track and create a ton of work for our tax office. What happens is, and I wasn't clear enough, so I'm glad you asked this question, but if you don't make your first installment by August 31st, you're in flat. You cannot opt into the installment program, right? And if you look at those dates, you're paying flat anyway. It's really to help people just budget it over a course of a couple months. Mm-hmm. But if you miss your first installment, you're not really missing out on anything except for kind of a help from a budgetary perspective. You still owe the same amount by October 31st. That's the way it's set up. What you can get into that is negative is you make your first payment on August 31st and you miss September 30th. Your second payment's now a penalty at 10% of the second installment. So when you said,
important for people to know.
So when you said, if you missed your second and then you just paid 2 on October 31st, the second one would be at a 10% penalty of a third of the tax essentially. And the third, as long as it's before the 31st, would be at that flat amount. Now, if you miss the third as well, you're now at a 10% penalty of 2/3 of your taxes if you miss both, which we've had happen in the past where we turn over delinquents. We don't just turn over delinquents of a property who has not paid taxes at all. We have in the past turned over people who have only paid their first installment, who have only paid their second and never paid their third or anywhere in between. And what happens is you have to turn it over at a 10% penalty because you've now gone into penalty. So you could expose yourself trying to pay the installments to essentially paying more than flat should you miss one of those payment windows.
Mm-hmm. So I guess this is great information, but I think the public really needs to know about these penalties. Obviously, it makes sense to try to space it out to minimize the impact of writing this huge check, probably the largest check you're going to write in a year. But if you don't honor that, then it can be financial implications, and I'm certain that everyone in the public doesn't know about those implications.
Yes, and I'll give the board a lot of credit for allowing us to do this last year, but one of the new pieces that we put into play for this current tax year was allowing ACH and credit card payments. So, the idea there was we weren't really sure how the pandemic was going to impact people, and if you were, let's say you were a month shy on being able to afford your taxes, if you were able to get it on your credit card, you could float it, the payment in theory, on your personal finance side of still being able to not hit that penalty of a 10%, but pay it face and maybe be able to pay off your credit card within that month to not incur interest on your payment. We wanted to give that flexibility. We've seen a lot of people take advantage of it. One of the other piece was from an ACH perspective, you have the money in your bank account and you just simply go through the ACH. There's no fee for that. What that gives you is if you got down to that tight window, instead of relying on, say, USPS to be able to ship your tax payment in, you could pay via ACH and guarantee immediately a receipt on the site through Wells Fargo to show that your payment went through. And we do see people using the credit card feature to, get flexibility just from a personal perspective of how they decide they want to pay their taxes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Mr. Rogers, thank you for putting this on the agenda this month. Just as a point of clarification, the ACH fee through Wells Fargo, there is no fee. If you pay, you can pay online for free if you do it through your bank account, not through a credit card, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And just for the people watching, and what percentage of our community, roughly, I know you probably don't have this right in front of you, pays their mortgage pays their taxes outside of a mortgage company?
So when you say that, you have to, it's complex. If you want to know a true residential dollar amount, and
Yeah,
the
the
reason why I say that is we collect taxes wholesale, right? Like I have a
Right.
total tax amount that's collected. It could be anything from residential, commercial, industrial, properties.
Right.
I have not pulled that information. I don't have it readily available to say of just residential properties, which are collected through mortgages. I know off the top of my head, I think it's somewhere in the 40-50% range that if I were to just look at it from a cash perspective, total collection, which is roughly around $100 million, 40-50 million of that comes from what's called mortgage tapes. They come in one big check, and there's 3 major companies that send those on behalf of
Right.
all of the major mortgage companies. But that's not a true number because, like I said, you'll have to adjust for commercial properties and make sure you're really, if you want to know from a residential perspective, because typically when those questions come up, most people are referring to the homeowners, the people who are sending their children to our schools and things like that.
Right.
If that's what you're asking, I can look into that and get you a more specific number.
I just sort of want to know, because what I heard you say earlier was the payments that are coming through mortgage companies, even if someone were to go into default, they're still going to pay us. So.
To a certain extent, yes.
Right. So I just wanted to get an idea. And the other just question along those same lines that I had was, what impact on you mentioned an impact on the budget, because we do budget for the revenue from penalty fees. What, roughly, I don't have the budget in front of me. Do you have an idea of what that number is?
So I'll just say too, it's not a specific line item in the budget, it's just built into the tax revenue. Off the top of my head, and don't quote me on this because it's been a year almost, I believe it was roughly around $300,000.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers, for your presentation and answering all the board members' questions. The discussion has been I found the discussion very helpful. 2 things. Thank you again for the presentation, for giving us this information. It is helpful. It is good to see that, we're not in a situation where alarms are going off like crazy. One minor question I had, if a homeowner starts down the installment route, makes the first 2 payments on time, and doesn't get the 3rd payment in until after October 31st, is the penalty applied just to the 3rd installment payment?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's the same with the second as well. So if you've missed the second by a week, 2 weeks, it would just be 10% of that specific installment payment, which is roughly, it's a third within a couple pennies. And then if you paid your 3rd on time or vice versa, you paid your 1st and 2nd on time, 3rd comes through, days late, weeks late, month late. It's just 10% of the open balance of that installment that you're dealing with.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm not sure if it had already just been asked or answered, but is there any way that we can actually dive into, even from a historical aspect, how much money or revenue had been generated from whatever penalties that had to be paid, and in consideration and in light of some of the real world things going on right now, would it be possible for the board at some point to explore any kind of needs-based assistance or any kind of special consideration that we can give? Because I'm a resident here. The tax situation is very real, and there are some people who have mortgage companies that are able to work with them based on it being an FHA-backed loan. Some mortgage companies are able to allow for borrowers, depending on whatever their financial circumstances happen to be, to have mortgage payment forgiveness and have that appended to the back end of their mortgage, basically like a first title lien, but then they can start paying their normal mortgage payments after whatever certain grace period. I believe it can be up to a year based on how that CARES Act and the legislation came from that goes. It could be different when the new president is sworn in next year. But could we get into that in any kind of detail at some point in the future? Not necessarily right now. I'd appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I honestly would have to defer to Mr. Bourbon from the legality perspective. But, you know, when I hear, as we walk through this, there's just from operating the district from the revenue perspective, that's really where, you know, we're talking about in the previous presentation, you know, the idea that, and Dr. McGarry had referenced minimizing tax increase and what that does to your budget and trying to cover these expenditures. You know I don't have to say this, but the majority of our budget is off the backs of local income and local revenue, which is mainly your tax base. So when we're talking about trying to minimize the increase and then it sounds like we're discussing the possibility of a decrease to that revenue, I just want to be wary that, you know, for every expenditure that goes away, there has to be, or for every revenue that goes away, we are going to have to take a look at our expenditures. So just, I want everyone to keep that in mind. And I feel for the community. I deal with this on a regular basis. We get requests constantly that come in from the community, and we do see certain people struggling to pay their tax bill, and you know we do everything we can within guidelines. The bill goes out, we have to follow those guidelines. So if the board's pleasure is to explore adjusting those guidelines for the upcoming year, then so be it, and we can have that conversation so long as we're allowed to. But for this year, we are, as Kyle had stated as well, as the bill goes out, you follow the guidelines, the deadlines, and if this is a conversation for the future, then that's the board's pleasure. We can have that conversation, within legal limitations.
Thank you so much, Craig, for explaining that. And I want all of the viewers out there right now to make this video a favorite in your bookmarks and send it to everyone that you know, and include and tag your state legislators, because they need to hear the kinds of things that boards like ours and our sibling districts all over the state, these kinds of things that we have to consider. Our primary responsibility is to make sure that your children and our faculty and everyone thrive in this ecosystem of a 21st century public school experience. And I find it, and I think others would agree with me, I find it unacceptable that this burden, this cost and this burden is saddled so heavily on the very gracious, big-hearted taxpayers here in Upper Darby School District. And it is not fair for us to continue to do more with less. It is unfair to continue to place that burden, in spite of a pandemic, on the community. We need state and federal government to step up. We need that help. Hold them accountable. Have them listen to the rest of this video from front to back. They need to know. Thank you.
You know, we do know that the community is suffering, and obviously we have a lot of concerns, but just for anyone listening, when we do decrease revenue, we do have to find that revenue someplace else, or we need to cut certain programs. $300,000 was one number that I heard. That is 3 teaching positions. So and we're already struggling with having enough staff to cover the program that we do offer at this point. The state, as we know, is not going to come in on a white horse and save us at this point. So these are real discussions, and while there are individuals that are suffering through this, we have 12,500 students that we have to make sure that, this is the only year that they get that education. And we have to make sure that we give them the best opportunities that are available to us. So, these are very, very hard discussions, and I appreciate that we have them tonight.
I can appreciate both Vice President Mitchell's comments and Board Director War Savage comments, I want to just reiterate, and I thank you, Mr. Rogers, for taking a look at this, because I want to just continue to consider those individuals who don't have mortgages, who are thinking about their payments right now, and who are thinking about how they can stretch them according to where they are. So I would really, really like to reiterate the points of Mr. War Savage, to say to those individuals who are listening that we should really, really reach out to our legislators. It's so important. They were just reelected. And it's really important that they hear our voices, because this is a concern. I know in the real estate industry, there's projections about foreclosures and as a result of this pandemic. And so we really need to be considering those who are on fixed budgets as well. That is always our concern as school board members, as we're raising taxes, but particularly in light of this pandemic. So much has changed. So many people have experienced tremendous loss. And I'm just concerned about the projection of what this is going to look like for 2021. So thank you, Mr. Rogers. I really appreciate it. And I also thank School Board Director Neil Desnoyers for bringing this to the table. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Are there any other comments from the board? Mr. Rogers, would you like to go over the agenda items that we had for tonight?
Sure. And before I do that, I don't typically like throwing out random numbers without making sure they're accurate. So I did just check, and last year's penalty, Ms. Mitchell, was $301,000. So
I think you were
just wanna
pretty
make sure.
close. Thank you.
So again, we had 4 items tonight. 3 were board action. So first up is the 2019-2020 annual audit report, presentation and summary, which was provided by Mr. Bill McGowan from Baker Tilly. He gave an overview of the annual audit and the results. We would just ask that the board move this forward for a vote to make the report official at the next board meeting.
Are all board members comfortable moving that forward?
Yes.
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 So the next item, agenda item number 2, is the 2021-2022 budget, which we discussed the preliminary budget versus the accelerated opt-out. We went through the timeline and how that impacts the district, and what it would mean to go down the path of a preliminary budget versus the accelerated opt-out, limiting the board to a tax increase of no more than 3.8%. The district administration recommends moving in the direction of an accelerated opt-out, and we'd ask if the board would like to move in that direction.
Are all board members comfortable with moving forward with that?
Yes.
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 The third item is capital improvements, which Mr. Harnachek reviewed our experiences through the past year for some of the capital improvements, where we stand and where we'd like to move. So this item is actually, unlike the past 2, where we asked the board to move, the board action is not to move it to the December 1st meeting, but to give us the authorization to proceed the projects that we projected out to complete in 2021.
And is the board comfortable moving those items forward?
Absolutely.
Yes.
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 The final item was the real estate tax collection review, which is informational, and we discussed and reviewed tax timelines, deadlines for payments, and also where we are as of October 31st from a cash collection perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Brown, I'll turn it back to you.
Did we ask for public comments?
I did.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Oh, did I? I'm sorry. Maybe I didn't. You're right. I believe I didn't. Ms. Buford, were there any public comments on the Finance and Operations Committee items?
No, there are no more comments from the public.
Thank you, Ms. Buford, and thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Dr. Haig. A motion is in order for the adjournment of the Finance and Operations Committee meeting.
So moved.
Meeting is adjourned.